Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to this afternoon seminar with Dr. Botagoz Ispambetova. She is a graduate of our PhD program, and she also currently works with Professor Dushan Shamatov, working on a funded project that is investigating the impact of publication requirements in universities in Kazakhstan. Today, she's presenting from her PhD research, which focuses on the institutionalization of research ethics in one university in Kazakhstan. Over to you, Botagoz.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, CARCEIT team, for organizing this seminar and providing an opportunity to present my PhD research, to remember my PhD journey and reflect on my study. The topic of my PhD research was institutionalization of human subject protection in research, a case study of one accelerated university in Kazakhstan. I want to start my presentation with telling you about how I come up with the topic and why I decided to investigate, explore IRAC policy, by which I mean institutionalization of human subject protection. During a PhD course in the first year, credits should go to Professor SGM. She was leading a course on Introduction to Educational Scholarship. And during this course, we had module on human research ethics. And one of the readings included why institutional review boards. Along with reporting on the importance of these committees and boards, it also reported the challenges that many people who interact with these boards, more specifically faculty, students, researchers, face. So they were reporting that these boards were a hurdle and obstacle for their timely completion of their research or timely data collection process. Some were referring to it as an ethics police, and in some contexts they were even reported to serve as a committee which restricts some topics or even some methodologies, so referring to it as methodological imperialism. And at that point of time, I was a master's student. I had an experience of going through IRAC process already, and I knew something about the process. And I started to investigate what are IRACs in our local universities. And these IRACs actually differed significantly from the one that we have at Nazarbayev University. Their purpose mainly included looking at ethics after the study is completed and when a student goes for a defense. So they're while in international practice of institutional review boards, also known as IRACs, is to review research proposals for human research ethics prior to data collection and ensure that human subjects who are taking part in these studies, proposed studies, are protected from research risks and their well-being is secured, and that potential participants are informed and provide full information in an understandable language and to decide whether they want to participate or not. And of course, at that point of time, Nazarbayev University was the only university that had an IRAC operating, and it's also it was a flagship university, so I had an idea that this practice is to be translated to other universities of the Kazakhstan. And that's why I decided to develop a purpose to understand why and how IRAC policy was adopted in a unique non-Western context. More specifically, I wanted to learn the drivers behind a new IREX creation, value it brings to Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, and to explore how a new IREX was established, experiences of stakeholders in interacting with the policy, how it was implemented and internalized into the local context. So the literature review showed, so these are the key topics of my literature review that I focused on, and I want to report some of them, briefly introduce you to. So institutionalization of human subject protection in research in the world. So I looked at the history of how IRBs and where they were first formed, and how the policy disseminated to other contexts. So literature review shows that these boards were mainly created in non-Western contexts to protect human subjects, while in many non-Western contexts, specifically in low and middle income contexts, countries, they were created to provide or grant access to for international research being conducted by industrialized countries in low and middle income countries, mainly in medical research. So then implementation, I also looked at the implementation of IREC policy, which showed that in different contexts, there were different experiences, and there were context issues affecting how it's being created and implemented. There were structural issues with the policy, and there were procedural issues. So context-wise, on implementation of IREC policy, the level of democratization level in the country affects. Also, the level of understanding of human research ethics and knowledge about human research ethics is also important. For structural issues, there were criticisms regarding the principles and regulations that these committees were applying for social science research. They were criticized that they were more suitable for medical research. And for procedural, there were issues in the diversity of IREC membership, their perspectives on what is good and what is bad, what is ethical and not, and also the differing cultural perspectives that people apply with and see what is ethical and not. As for internalization of IREC policy, more and more we see that IRECs are being adapted to the local context. Principles are being reconsidered in the way so that it fits the local context, and context-specific issues are reflected in the regulations and the norms. Also, in some contexts, IRECs were reported to be depriving researchers and faculty of academic freedom, suggesting what to research and how to research. Yeah, and also finally, it was important to look at the research and the research ethics in Central Asia. So as we know, in Central Asia, in post-Soviet, post-socialist context, research had always been separate from higher education institutions. It mainly developed within academia, institutions, research institutions. So this also affected social science as well, and it can be observed that in Central Asian context, there is low understanding of human research ethics, underdeveloped structures, regulations at the national level, and some, more importantly, understanding of people of research. So it's mainly research is always accepted as an inspection rather than something that will that is done for the benefit of society. I applied two theories as IREC policy is an educational policy being mainly implemented in academia. I applied theory from the comparative education. And also as IREC is about rules, norms, and regulations, I saw the need to look from the new institutional and institutional theory perspective, which considers institutions as rules and regulations and norms that are aimed to the diffusion of rules and norms and regulations to regulate human behavior. Now I will dwell upon these two theories, how they informed my study. So the first theory, new institutional theory, all of these theories can be, at some point, they discuss and assume similar things. There are discrepancies as well if you more deeply investigate these theories. So new institutional theory assumes that institutions diffuse mainly for legitimacy concerns, while policy borrowing allows the lesson learning or drawing aspect. While new institutional theory says that there are mainly institutions diffuse because of the imposition and there is an deliberate borrowing happening. From comparative education, we can see that there is also voluntariness taking place in when some policies are borrowed. And in some cases, new institutional theory actually adopts policies and institutions regardless of domestic circumstances, while policy borrowing admits that there are some dissatisfaction and problems with the status quo and there is a need for a certain policy. I combine these theories to answer to research question 2, which was how was the new IREC policy implemented and internalized. So the new institutional theory helped me to frame IREC policy as an institution combining 3 elements: normative, regulative, and cultural cognitive, where normative implies those institutions that are subject to sanctions. Regulative institutions are those that are subject to sanctions. Normative not subject to sanctions, and regulatives are subject to sanctions, and cultural cognitive are those that people take for granted and see it as the thing, as the way they do things. This framework helped me to look more deeply into the IREC policy's components from these perspectives. For example, how the normative element, how the regulative, and how cultural cognitive element was implemented. I applied qualitative method. A case study design was chosen as the best one. I conducted document analysis, in semi-structured interviews and observations. And now I think I can share the findings of my study. Why was a new IREC policy adopted? So I constructed 4 findings. The most common theme coming out from my data was that IREC policy was adopted to legitimize an international research university status. In other words, participants reported that IREC was borrowed because it is a research university, Nazarbayev University, and it should have, because without it, it cannot aspire to become an international research university. You can see it from the quotes. It's like one of the institutional things that needed to be set up in order to be an international university. Second is that it was established to legitimize an international researcher status. So for many faculty members, IREC was associated with an important stage of research, which gives them the feeling of an international researcher. who completes the whole process of whole research process. And one of the participants shared that he was aware that he worked with colleagues from other universities, and they didn't have IREC. And when he was comparing himself with them, having an IREC at Nazarbayev University made him advantages in terms of he felt himself as a researcher totally. And third, it was established to legitimize research practice and at international level, by which I mean that by which participants believed that IREC gave an opportunity for them to publish, to apply for research grants and be competitive at international level. And lastly, I think this theme was very common among students. They believed that this practice, that IREC was implemented to disseminate policy to other universities of the country. It's very interesting that they had the same idea that they were aware and cognizant of the local situation in relation to human research ethics and IRECs, and that's why they believed that this practice will be translated to other universities of the country. And their perspectives on the rationale behind institutionalizing human subject protection in research was reflected in the implementation of the IREC policy. Now I will discuss it more in detail. So how was annual IREC policy implemented? That was my second question. As the data showed, it flowed in 3 stages, which were identified based on the key differences and changes in policy context, in the agency being more active over another, and structure and processes. The first stage of policy implementation was referred as a normative policy implementation, and I will explain why. So at that time, in the beginning of NU formation, faculty were initiated to create the IREC, as my data showed, and they were the creators, initiators, and formulators of the policy. But at that point of time, the policy context was defined as young university partnering with top universities of the country, and mainly being able to attract early career researchers, which implies that the research capacity at that point of time at Nazarbayev University was not suitable to create strong structures for IREC and strong procedures, which, as you can see from the quotes regarding the context, it was difficult to get full professors unless they were close to retirement. We were more successful with faculty who were new doctoral students. They had nothing. There was chaos everywhere, and people needed precise policies. As related to the process, people's experiences, it was a period when not all faculty were aware of the need for IREC review, because not all of them had rigorous experience. I mean, they didn't have experience of going through a rigorous process, and sometimes some of faculty's experiences with IREC were limited to their PhD research only. So some would, as for the processes, there were responses like faculty could apply for ethics review retrospectively, or choose to lie that they did research, but ethics review process, but in reality not. IREC members were not also that much active. Only certain people were the same people will contribute into the meetings, and the same people will be present, which shows that at that point of time, IRAC members were not performing their duties fully, not because maybe they didn't want, but because they lacked really experience and capacity to do their service. And CTI training was in place, but not all of them saw the need to do that. There were long-taking reviews, and leadership ensured that international norms were present. And this stage was referred to as a normative policy implementation because normative structures were in place. There was an IREC, and it was guided by Belmont report, but there were no bylaws and no procedures approved yet, and then there were no sanctions if you don't go through IREC process. The second stage of IREC policy implementation is referred to as a regulative policy implementation. The context, of course, changed. It was a period when a lot of training was going on. All the stakeholders, students, faculty members, IREC members, had to go through CTI training. Without it, they couldn't apply for research grants, which informs us of the regulative structure being in place. And IREC members become more active at this period of time. They were formulating all these bylaws and procedures, adapting it to the local context. Then structure-wise, as I said, they were developed procedures, and the process, of course, once people were
and commuted ourselves.
Mhm. And recommendations. Recommendations for higher education institutions adopting IRAC policy in similar non-Western contexts and local contexts is to establish shared values and shared understanding of the rationale behind the policy within the university community, to ensure relevant training is available and expertise developed within the university community, and to ensure that IRAC is granted a relevant level of power and authority, and to refer to local students or local culture representatives with academic backgrounds in implementing and internalizing the policy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Botagoz. We have time, so I suggest we can do a buzz, 2 to 3 minutes. You can draw on your own experiences of dealing with ethics. It could be, questions that you want to pose to Botagoz, theoretical questions, yeah? Yes.
Thank you very much.
I'm saying let's have a short buzz.
Oh, okay.
Then you So maybe you can discuss with Alexander, and you can also join them.
I'm just discussing our experience with ethics. Sure. Well, I've gone through an ethics process. Sort of the guys who was doing research abroad in India,
So I was involved in the project, well, cultural university, so I helped with the economic data survey for this, and then by the end of our contract, I really appreciate to have the developed the public article, but I never had a chance to hear some stuff like probably miss the result of the work.
Position methodology.
When I had a I was really impressed about the support researchers should have. Yes, so there is a like researchers should have like support, psychological support, like looking for a leadership, looking for colleagues or professors looking you up. Researchers are alone with your work, but you need to collaborate, work with others, which is really important actually. So underestimated like
Can bring it out.
actually
Shall I be typing?
I think we can just read it out loud so that others can. I will let know.
I can't ask for support. So, like, I'm a researcher, I should for myself. No, he's on the university, he's never ever.
Are we muted?
Maybe.
Yeah.
This summer, for taking the pleasure, this is a by the local university. So, like, you are working just being sure that all your policy changes. And then I'm sorry, I was doing my sales in the country with ethics. I also use it only as something from But here, at least we don't work we understand what is trends. There is probably we should have some kind of maybe not a force, but maybe some discussions to really develop values and understanding.
What I think in my
And really
journey
also
getting
the
to one side versus I had to actually apply for a change to my because suddenly something
Okay,
changed.
apologies for stopping the very productive discussion that is going on. We have a question already online from Aliyah, which is about recommendations on how to establish a shared value of human subject protection at Kazakhstani institutions. And already Helmut wanted to ask a question. So,
My goal is especially in my mind. So I was
Okay.
ready to do it.
okay, so Helmut, what is your question?
So, since she was conducting her research about ethics, how was your experience in getting ethics clearance?
Okay.
I
think
assume what's the university that you're, conducting the research. So I would like to know how was your experience, and also were there any unexpected challenges or delays, or maybe not sharing some documents? So I would like to.
And particularly because you were doing backyard research, yeah, where the chances of offering anonymity to the participating institution is very low, yeah. So two questions. One is Aliyah's question about how do you actually develop this shared understanding, shared value, and the other one is your own experience of dealing with IREC.
Yeah. So because I was conducting research on IREC, which reviews it. My study was reviewed at the school level IREC first, and then it was decided that in order to not cause a conflict of interest, an expert from a different university was assigned and reviewed. It was very straightforward, the same process as it was for students, where I was explaining how I'm going to protect my participants, how the confidentiality issues will be ensured. All these issues were reported in the application form, and the expert assigned it a status as minimal, no more than minimal risk research.
It was quite smooth.
Yes, but related to data collection, there were restrictions. Like I couldn't access some of the documents, like the ones that were created in the beginning of it, like the minutes. But I was allowed to participate in full review board meetings. And
Can you
because
tell us, remind us what was the period in which you collected your data?
It was 2020, I think, between 2020 and 2023.
Aliyah's question about
what are the recommendations on how to establish a shared value of human subject protection at Kazakhstani institutions? So the recommendation will be to inform local faculty members, researchers and students of the history of human research ethics, inform them about different unethical studies conducted not only in medical field, but the ones that are conducted also in other disciplines which pose risks. And there were cases when privacy of participants were broken, and the confidentiality issues were not well secured. And I think this is very important to inform them about these unethical cases and make them understand that this institution is not serving to restrict them in their research, but more to support them and see how they can better improve their research studies so that they do not put at risk their participants.
Thank you. Yeah, can I just share like a brief comment about this? I was just sharing like before in our discussion as well that I just remember my experience as a master's student when I also needed to submit an ethics application to start my study. And I remember that I didn't have really an understanding. I think the understanding was quite limited. I think we view this ethics application more as a formal requirement that you need to do in order to start your study. But we didn't really have, I think, any like deeper values or understanding underpinning that more formal process. Yeah. So, right. So I was just thinking like how we can maybe have those discussions maybe with students to help them develop those values and understanding underpinning this like more formal processes and regulations.
Then I think that is a very good question. Often when students write the ethics section, they would just repeat what they had said in their ethics application, yeah? But ethical implications go on beyond getting ethical clearance. Those issues arise in the field and even beyond the field in writing up and in dissemination.
Yeah. And there is no reflection in the process. Yeah. It's just something you do at the beginning.
I have a question.
Yes.
Not a question, but a comment.
Yeah.
Thank you, your research, sharing your research. Regarding IREC committee, a new sharing experience, do we have the goal to share the experience of this policy implementation from the policy implementation process to other universities? Do we have this goal?
No, they don't have such goal. Well, I didn't actually ask about it, but I reviewed all the documents and there was nothing reporting of sharing their experience and working on it.
Because our universities need this experience.
And because I think it is a service-based work, which takes a lot of time to do those reviews.
I mean, just to add, Professor Elaine Chaplin, who was the IREC chair, she did a lot of work. Actually, she developed resources in Kazakh and in Russian so that those who don't have access to CT, they can, because we also needed our collaborators and we couldn't get IREC clearance if our collaborators were not trained and had that CT certificate. So she actually developed equivalent online tests and translated those with the help of Kazakhstani colleagues in Russian and Kazakh. So I would say, it's not that NU has not done its
not NU, but we're talking about NU IREC. Yeah, IREC is not doing, but in general, NU, which is faculty, students who are
in relation to research,
Yeah.
In relation to research, NU IREC under Elaine's leadership did a lot in terms of training researchers.
Our students as research assistants as agency, they did a huge amount of work explaining about ethics. When we go to the site, we did a huge amount of work about it. And for example, even when we participate in the research as participants, we were also highlighting the issues from the other universities. And but in terms of IREC in other universities, in Kazakhstani universities, like social science and human, like research with human participation, there are initiatives to launch this kind of IREC, but I think they have difficulties. But that's why I'm asking.
So I mean, my question is quite building up on Jadra's question, and it's about policy borrowing, yeah?
Yeah.
NU is quite a unique institution with lots of international faculty who previously had experience of IREC in well-established universities, they could use that knowledge in establishing a strong IREC here, supported by any leadership. Of course, local universities are very different than Kazakhstani universities, and if we go with the logic of policy borrowing, what advice, based on your knowledge of Kazakhstani university and your deep knowledge of NU, what kind of realistic advice you would offer them going about developing a new IREC universities?
I think although the context is different in many terms, the flow of the stages can be actually followed, because we see that regulatory framework cannot be implemented straight away without informing and developing shared value and understanding of human research ethics. Therefore, there should be a normative element built first, like you are educating, you are training, informing, and then you have to, after certain period of time, there is a need for regulations with not, I don't want to say the word punishment, but there should be regulation that will force everyone to go through and get an experience. Because IREC is not only getting the clearance, as you said, it's about learning, and it's also about if you are a person who has never been in the field and communicating with people, you cannot foresee the risks. But there are people, maybe experts, who can tell you what are the risks and how they can be minimized. And after regulatory basis will be in place, people understanding is built, shared understanding is built. I think there is a place for a cultural cognitive understanding when people will not see it as an ethics police, but will see it as a mandatory stage in research. You just take it for granted, and you can already visualize what are your potential risks and how you can minimize them. What should you do in order to be, how to say, to be ethical in the field? And I think this scheme is applicable to local universities and not only. And I think this practice was in place in many other contexts as well.
The reason why I asked you about the date of your data collection is very important. I have a bit longer experience dealing with ethics in Nazarbayev University, and it can be, depending on the practices of IREC, it can be very painful for researchers who are very well-intended, who don't want to harm, who are aware of ethical principles, but depending on the practices of IREC. So I'm just, conscious of how, given the context of local universities, how it can be backfired. It can backfire as well and can be used for limiting and controlling the work of researchers as well. Even in this university, colleagues lost their grant because for 2 years, IREC would not allow them to do research. And these were not researchers who were not familiar with ethics. These were colleagues who came from very good universities. And so basically the problem was not the people who were writing the applications, but the people who were making decisions. You came at a relatively good time when IREC under Elaine Shaplin's leadership sorted out all the existing problems with the IREC, but it can be very, very
I'm
controlling,
actually
yeah.
reporting it
Yeah.
that it was a period
Yeah.
when the regulatory
Yeah.
basis was
Yeah.
implemented, that there were pains
Yeah.
and people.
So I'm just
resisted.
talking, not about your reports, but I'm just thinking how it can be contextualized in other universities. If this was the case with international people, with international experience and really plotting the research and the careers of other people, what can you expect, from people with very hierarchical views and very controlling practices, if you give this kind of ammunition in the hands. So it has to be, what I'm saying is, in theory, I totally agree with the significance of, in fact, when I write an ethics application, only then I'm very clear in my head, how will I go about doing it? So it's not just for ethics, but the methodological clarity you only get when you start thinking about how you will do it to satisfy NUIRIC. So enormous benefits, but it depends on the practices of those who control or who are in the decision-making position. Otherwise, they can really damage the research culture as well, although they might be thinking they are doing good, not with bad intentions, but if they don't have the right skills, they can damage the careers of other people as well as the institutional flourishing of research in the institution. Any further questions and observations?
There's a comment on that?
Yes, please.
There's a comment.
Yeah, okay. So can you read it?
Yeah, I can read it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's by Alia again.
Yeah.
Institutions may be legally compelled to launch IREX, but the real question is whether they embrace the underlying concept and are motivated to implement it effectively.
Yes, absolutely.
And know that Botagoz, she's initiating her help for local universities, regional universities, to launch this IREC, and she's willing to share her experience. And also she's looking for mentors who can help her to do this process as well. From a UGC to maybe, I think maybe CARCEIT will be part of it as well. Could be part of it in helping and developing this culture and normative practices, ethics within. But I know that you already started there working with one university, helping to launch IREC.
So developing knowledge and understanding, I think, is far more important than the regulatory aspect, because as I mentioned, that if the regulatory aspect is in the hands of untrained or not properly informed people, it can become a problem, as well as was the case in our own institution. And basically it is about doing good, thinking about the benefits and the interests of your participants, not just for getting the clearance to do research, but beyond that, in terms of dissemination. I think there are crucial issues for researchers to think about the impact of their research, not just on the people who participated in that research, but on the wider image or representation of the population from which you selected your participants. So it's basically a philosophical approach, being sensitive and has to be dealt with carefully. So for example, in Finland, they don't, like in these Scandinavian countries, they don't have institutional boards at all. Ethical practices expected of everyone. So the focus is on the training. When I did my PhD at Sussex, I wasn't required to take permission. So I didn't actually write an application at that time to get, but it doesn't mean that I wasn't trained in ethics. So without even getting ethical clearance, research ethics was part of our training in the same way as we were trained in methodology, and we still had to write a section on research ethics far more reflective than what students write. They just copy and paste it, copy it from their ethics application and paste it in their thesis. Yeah, so it is about practice and about principles rather than always about regulation. But I agree where there isn't that shared practice. Maybe the first part is to develop that understanding and that knowledge and about when can research harm people and how can we make sure our practice doesn't harm.
Normative
Yes.
policy implementation should
Exactly.
be, it should precede the
Yes.
regulatory framework.
Yeah.
But related to those countries, the level of democratization level
Yes.
and human rights
Yeah.
is very, how to say, disseminated, so people know their rights. And in our context, post-social countries, where group or how do we say, social goods were more important than individual well-being. You can harm people and they didn't even know how they were actually put under risk. So, and also it depends on the topics that we pursue, right? In education field, we may look at policies, interact with mature people, but if we, even if we conduct research with children, although it is a vulnerable population, you're less likely to harm them, right? But there are studies where in social field where you can really,
Of course.
you may miss it.
Surely. Yes, Tom?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that something I learned when I was doing my ethical procedure, really to treat it as a process rather than just kind of a gatekeeping product. But also power relationships are really important part of it, and since in education, since often there are power relationships with an institute, the researcher themselves hold power, and so that kind of puts the idea of informed consent into a bit of a gray area, because how informed really is consent, and so that kind of reflexivity is really important. So that's what I learned about it, and it has to be part of the process, and speaking to the participants about it, and just ensuring that is communicated and disseminated.
Absolutely. And then what is like the culturally appropriate way of even demonstrating consent? For example, NU IRIC is heavily shaped by US regulations, and many of those practices, although we adopt it, we are very critical of those practices because this is a very different context compared to the US, and you can't just take away those practices. So the principles are universal, but how you implement that principle has to be adjusted to a particular context. And in many contexts, those Western notions of putting your signature to something will not work. So maybe, in terms of policy borrowing, it is a good idea for local universities to contextualize NU IRIC to their own context rather than be driven by Western practices of ensuring ethics. So the principles will remain the same regardless of which context you are going to, but how you actually demonstrate and ensure that principle is adhered to has to be done in contextually relevant ways.
I think the idea behind the informed consent form you signing, it's not only about protecting your human participants, but it's also about protecting researcher from different consequences. That's very common in the US context, that people can sue researchers, or it can damage university's reputation. So there are different issues behind those.
Yeah, exactly. But this
yeah.
is a very different culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, participants can get into trouble if they sign, or there can be hesitation to do it for a range of reasons. In many contexts, signing a contract is actually a formal thing. So once you sign, people might just think, I cannot now withdraw from the study because I have signed my consent. Yeah. So cultures are very different. I think the idea is good, the principles are good, but we need more culturally appropriate practices of ensuring ethics rather than solely driven by what the US has set up. And it works perfectly well in that context, but might not work in many contexts where signing something is very different. Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much, Botagoz, and we look forward to you translating these practices in a culturally appropriate way in local universities. And it's also brilliant that you got clearance to do this research.
Yes, because
had you applied in 2018 or 2019, you would have a very different experience getting this ethical clearance as well. Yeah. Thank you very much to our online participants as well. And next week, we will be here again for a fantastic seminar with Alexandra and her team on gender and women and computer sciences, yeah? With AI included. So I look forward to that, Alexandra.